What if I told you that before European colonization, Native Americans cultivated over 4,000 different food plants across North America? Vegetables so perfectly adapted to local climates that they thrived for thousands of years without irrigation, without fertilizers, and without the constant care modern crops demand. Then colonization happened, and 90% of these crops were systematically erased, replaced, or forgotten. These weren't primitive foods. These were sophisticated crops developed through millennia of observation, selection, and agricultural genius. Vegetables that could survive droughts that would kill your tomatoes. Crops that built soil while producing food. Plants that fed entire civilizations sustainably. Today, I'm revealing 16 forgotten vegetables that Native Americans grew. Vegetables that desperately need to return to our gardens. Number 7 produces more protein than beef per acre. Number 12 was so important it's been found in 8,000-year-old archaeological sites. And that bonus tip at the end shows you how to source authentic seeds and become part of the movement bringing these crops back. This is food sovereignty. Let's reclaim it. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm passionate about preserving indigenous food knowledge, seed sovereignty, and growing crops that connect us to the land. And today's topic is both heartbreaking and hopeful. Here's what happened. When Europeans colonized the Americas, they didn't just take land, they took food systems. Native American agriculture was deliberately suppressed and replaced with European crops like wheat, barley, and Old World vegetables. Indigenous peoples were forced onto reservations with poor soil and told to farm crops that weren't adapted to those conditions. Traditional seed-saving practices were disrupted. Within a few generations, thousands of indigenous crop varieties vanished. This wasn't accidental. It was cultural erasure through agricultural destruction. Control the food system, and you control the people. But here's what colonizers didn't understand. The crops Native Americans developed over thousands of years were perfectly adapted to North American climates, soils, and growing conditions. They were drought-resistant, pest-resistant, and resilient in ways European crops could never match. Losing these crops wasn't just a cultural tragedy. It was an agricultural disaster. Today, indigenous communities, seed savers, and agricultural historians are working to bring these crops back. Organizations like Native Seeds/Search, Dream of Wild Health, and the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network are preserving and distributing seeds. And gardeners like you can help by growing these crops, saving seeds, and sharing the knowledge. Before we start, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel is about food sovereignty and preserving agricultural heritage. And drop a comment telling me if you have indigenous heritage or if you've grown any Native American crops. Your story matters. All right. Let's start with forgotten vegetable number 1. Vegetable number 1, Tepary beans. Starting at number 1, we have Tepary beans, and these are the ultimate survival crop of the desert Southwest. Tepary beans were cultivated by the Tohono O'odham, Pima, Apache, and other indigenous peoples for at least 5,000 years in what's now Arizona, New Mexico, and northern Mexico. Here's why Tepary beans need to return. They're the most drought-tolerant beans in the world, producing crops with as little as 10 inches of annual rainfall. They thrive in temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit that would kill common beans. And they're incredibly nutritious, with 23% protein, high fiber, and exceptional levels of iron and calcium. Native peoples grew Tepary beans in the harshest desert conditions, understanding that resilience meant survival. They developed multiple varieties, white, brown, black, and speckled, each adapted to slightly different microclimates. When European agriculture arrived, common beans from Europe and South America replaced Tepary beans because they had higher yields under irrigation. But in today's climate crisis, with water scarcity increasing, Tepary beans are more relevant than ever. How do you grow Tepary beans? Plant in late spring after soil warms to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. They need heat to germinate. Space 4 to 6 inches apart. Water minimally. Seriously, Tepary beans produce better with drought stress. Harvest when pods dry completely, about 80 to 100 days. Cook like any dried bean. Soak overnight, simmer until tender. The flavor is earthy, nutty, and rich. Perfect for southwestern dishes, soups, and refried beans. Tepary beans represent adaptation. They evolved to thrive in conditions modern agriculture considers impossible. We need that resilience now more than ever. Vegetable number 2, wild rice. At number 2, we have wild rice, and technically this isn't a vegetable, it's a grain, but it's too important to leave out. Wild rice was a staple food for the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe. Peoples around the Great Lakes region harvested from natural stands in shallow lakes and rivers. Here's why wild rice needs to return. It's incredibly nutritious, with more protein than white or brown rice, high fiber and rich in B vitamins, magnesium, and zinc. It's gluten-free and has a nutty, earthy flavor that's far superior to commercial rice. Wild rice isn't cultivated like Asian rice. It grows naturally in shallow waters. The Anishinaabe harvested it from canoes, bending the stalks over the canoe and knocking the ripe seeds loose with sticks. This traditional harvest method is still practiced today in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of Canada. The problem is that wild rice habitat has been destroyed by development, pollution, and dams. Natural stands have declined dramatically, and commercially grown wild rice from paddies in California isn't the same. It's a different species entirely. Supporting traditional wild rice means supporting indigenous harvest rights and protecting wild rice waters. You can buy authentic wild rice from indigenous suppliers, ensuring that native communities benefit from their traditional food. If you have access to wild rice waters and proper permissions, you can harvest it traditionally. Otherwise, support organizations working to restore wild rice habitats and indigenous harvest rights. Cook wild rice by simmering in water for 45 to 60 minutes until the grains split and become tender. The flavor is complex, nutty, and deeply satisfying. Mix it with vegetables, serve as a side dish, or use in soups and stuffings. Wild rice represents sovereignty. It's a food that belongs to specific places and peoples. Honoring that connection is part of bringing this crop back responsibly. Vegetable number 3, Jerusalem artichoke, sunchoke. Number 3 is Jerusalem artichoke. Sunchoke, also called sunchoke or sunroot. Despite the name, it has nothing to do with Jerusalem or artichokes. It's a native North American tuber that was cultivated by numerous indigenous peoples across the continent. Here's why Jerusalem artichokes need to return. The tubers are incredibly nutritious, high in iron, potassium, and inulin, a type of prebiotic fiber that supports gut health. They're productive. One planted tuber produces dozens of new tubers, and they're nearly indestructible, tolerating poor soil, drought, and neglect. Native peoples cultivated Jerusalem artichokes extensively, harvesting the tubers in fall and winter. The plants grow tall, up to 10 feet, with sunflower-like flowers. The tubers taste nutty and slightly sweet, like a cross between potatoes and artichokes. When European colonizers arrived, Jerusalem artichokes were adopted enthusiastically and taken back to Europe, where they became popular. But in North America, they were gradually replaced by potatoes, which had higher yields and were easier to store. Today, Jerusalem artichokes are making a comeback. They're recognized as a low-glycemic food, perfect for diabetics, and their prebiotic properties support digestive health. How do you grow Jerusalem artichokes? Plant tubers in spring, 4 to 6 inches deep and 12 to 18 inches apart. They prefer full sun but tolerate partial shade. Water until established, then ignore them. They're incredibly vigorous and spread readily. Harvest tubers after frost, which converts starches to sugars and improves flavor. Dig as needed throughout winter, leaving some tubers in the ground for next year's crop. They regrow automatically. Cook Jerusalem artichokes by roasting, mashing, or slicing raw into salads. They have a crisp, water chestnut-like texture when raw. Roasted, they become creamy and sweet. Warning: some people experience digestive upset from the inulin. Start with small amounts to see how your body responds. Vegetable number 4, groundnut, Apios americana. At number 4, we have groundnut, also called Apios americana or Indian potato. This is a nitrogen-fixing vine that produces edible tubers with more protein than potatoes and a flavor like a cross between potatoes and peanuts. Here's why groundnut needs to return. It's one of the most protein-rich tubers in the world, containing about 16% protein compared to 2% in potatoes. It's a perennial that comes back year after year without replanting, and it fixes nitrogen, improving soil while producing food. Native peoples across eastern North America cultivated groundnut, harvesting the chain-like tubers that grow along the roots. The tubers were a staple food, especially in winter when other foods were scarce. European colonists relied on groundnut during early settlement. It literally kept them alive during harsh winters. But as agriculture became established, groundnut was abandoned in favor of crops that could be grown on larger scales. Today, groundnut is nearly forgotten, grown only by foragers and indigenous seed keepers. But it deserves to return because it's productive, nutritious, and requires minimal care. How do you grow groundnut? plant tubers or seeds in spring in moist, rich soil. Groundnut prefers partial shade and consistent moisture. The vines climb, so provide a trellis or let them scramble through other plants. The vines produce attractive, fragrant flowers that smell like roses. Harvest tubers in fall of the second year. First-year tubers are small. By the second year, they're larger and more productive. Dig carefully to avoid breaking the chain of tubers. Cook groundnut by boiling or roasting. The flavor is nutty and earthy, richer than potatoes. Some people compare it to chestnuts. Groundnut contains protease inhibitors that must be destroyed by cooking, so never eat them raw. Groundnut represents hidden abundance. It's a high-protein food that grows in shady, moist areas where most crops struggle. That's valuable niche filling in a diverse food system. Vegetable number 5, Hopi pale gray squash. Number 5 is Hopi pale gray squash, a variety developed by the Hopi people of the Southwest over centuries. This squash is uniquely adapted to desert conditions, producing reliable harvests with minimal water. Here's why Hopi pale gray squash needs to return. It's exceptionally drought-tolerant, with deep roots that access water far below the surface. It's disease-resistant, thriving in conditions where modern squash varieties fail. And it has superior flavor and storage qualities compared to commercial squash. The Hopi developed this squash through careful selection in one of North America's harshest agricultural environments. They planted seeds deep, 8 to 12 inches, to reach moisture. The plants developed extensive root systems that allowed them to survive on rainfall alone. When commercial agriculture arrived, hybrid squash varieties with higher yields under irrigation replaced traditional varieties like Hopi pale gray. But in today's climate crisis, the drought tolerance of Hopi squash is critically important. How do you grow Hopi pale gray squash? Plant seeds in late spring in full sun. Plant deep, 8 to 12 inches, to encourage deep rooting. Space 4 to 6 feet apart. Water until established, then reduce watering. The plants are drought tolerant once rooted. Harvest when the skins harden and the stems dry, usually in fall. Cure for 2 weeks in a warm, dry place, then store in a cool, dry location. They'll last for months. Cook like any winter squash. Roast, mash, or use in soups. The flesh is sweet, dense, and flavorful. The seeds are large and delicious when toasted. Supporting Hopi pale gray squash means buying seeds from indigenous suppliers like Native Seeds/Search, ensuring that Hopi communities benefit from their agricultural heritage. Vegetable number 6, Chenopodium, goosefoot. At number 6, we have Chenopodium, also called goosefoot, lamb's quarters, or huauzantli, depending on the species. Native Americans cultivated several species of Chenopodium for their edible leaves and seeds long before European contact. Here's why Chenopodium needs to return. The leaves are more nutritious than spinach, with higher protein, calcium, iron, and vitamins. The seeds are protein-rich and were used like quinoa, which is also a Chenopodium. And the plants are incredibly easy to grow, tolerating poor soil, heat, and drought. Native peoples across North America cultivated Chenopodium, harvesting young leaves for greens and seeds for storage. It was a staple food before corn became dominant. When European agriculture arrived, Chenopodium was dismissed as a weed. Today, most gardeners pull it out without realizing they're destroying a highly nutritious indigenous crop. How do you grow Chenopodium? Often you don't need to. It shows up on its own in disturbed soil. If you want to cultivate it intentionally, scatter seeds in spring and thin to 12 inches apart. Harvest young leaves when tender. Let some plants go to seed for future crops. Cook leaves like spinach. The flavor is mild and slightly earthy. Harvest seeds in late summer by cutting seed heads and threshing. Cook seeds like quinoa. Chenopodium represents resilience. It's a crop that grows itself, asking for nothing while providing abundant nutrition. That's the genius of indigenous food systems. Vegetable number 7, Amaranth. Number 7 is Amaranth, which I've covered in other videos, but it deserves mention here because it was cultivated by Native American peoples across the continent long before the Aztecs. Archaeological evidence shows amaranth cultivation in North America dating back over 6,000 years. Here's why amaranth needs to return. It's a complete protein with all essential amino acids. It's more productive than corn in terms of edible biomass per acre. And both the seeds and leaves are edible, providing multiple harvests from one plant. Native peoples across North America grew amaranth for seeds and greens. Different tribes developed different varieties adapted to local conditions. When European colonizers arrived, Amaranth was suppressed because it was associated with indigenous religions and culture. It nearly disappeared from North America entirely. Today, Amaranth is being reclaimed by indigenous seed keepers and sustainable farmers. It's recognized as a climate-resilient crop perfect for hot, dry conditions. Grow amaranth by planting in late spring in full sun. Harvest leaves when young for greens. Harvest seeds in fall when seed heads dry. Amaranth is heat and drought tolerant, requiring minimal care. Amaranth represents cultural survival. It endured suppression, survived in hidden gardens, and is now reclaiming its place in indigenous food systems. Hey, quick pause. If you're realizing how much agricultural knowledge we've lost, hit that like button right now. This isn't just history, it's knowledge we desperately need today. And drop a comment telling me if you've grown any indigenous crops or if you want to learn more. Your engagement helps this message reach more people. All right, let's continue with the next 9 forgotten vegetables. Vegetable number 8, Three Sisters beans. At number 8, we have the various bean varieties grown in the Three Sisters system. Multiple indigenous nations across North America developed the Three Sisters agricultural system. Corn, beans, and squash grown together in a symbiotic relationship. Here's why these specific bean varieties need to return. They were bred specifically to climb corn stalks efficiently. They fix nitrogen, feeding the corn and squash. And they're adapted to local climates, thriving where modern bean varieties struggle. Each indigenous nation developed their own bean varieties suited to their region. Cherokee Trail of Tears beans, Hopi black beans, Anasazi beans, Aztec red beans, and dozens more. When commercial agriculture arrived, these specialized varieties were replaced by common beans bred for monoculture farming. The specific adaptations that made these beans perfect companions for corn were lost. How do you grow Three Sisters beans? Plant corn first. When corn is 6 inches tall, plant beans around the base of each stalk. 3 to 4 beans per stalk. The beans will climb the corn and fix nitrogen as they grow. Harvest beans when pods dry, usually 90 to 120 days after planting. Many of these varieties are excellent as dried beans for winter storage. Supporting authentic Three Sisters bean varieties means sourcing seeds from indigenous suppliers, ensuring these specific adaptations aren't lost again. Vegetable number 9, Kushaw squash. Number 9 is Kushaw squash, a group of striped, curved-neck squash varieties developed by indigenous peoples in what's now the southeastern United States. Kushaw squash are uniquely adapted to hot, humid climates where other squash struggle. Here's why Kushaw squash needs to return. They're resistant to squash vine borers, a devastating pest that destroys most squash in the South. They're heat and humidity tolerant, thriving in conditions that cause powdery mildew in other varieties. And they have excellent flavor and storage qualities. Native peoples in the Southeast, including Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole nations, cultivated Kushaw for centuries. Different varieties were developed for different uses, some for fresh eating, some for storage, some for seeds. When commercial agriculture arrived, uniform hybrid squash replaced regional varieties like Kushaw. But in the South, where squash vine borers make growing squash nearly impossible, Kushaw's resistance is invaluable. How do you grow Kushaw squash? Plant in late spring in full sun. Space 4 to 6 feet apart. The vines are vigorous and sprawl widely. Water regularly until established. Harvest when skins harden and stems dry. Cure for 2 weeks, then store. Kushaw squash stores for 6 to 12 months in cool, dry conditions. Cook like winter squash. The flesh is sweet and less watery than many modern varieties. Use in pies, soups, or roasted dishes. Kushaw represents regional adaptation. These squash evolved to thrive in specific conditions. That local adaptation is precisely what we need in a changing climate. Vegetable number 10, Devil's Claw. At number 10, we have Devil's Claw, and this one's unusual. Devil's Claw is a desert plant cultivated by the Tohono O'odham and other Southwest peoples for its edible young seed pods and fiber-producing mature pods. Here's why Devil's Claw needs to return. The young pods are edible, tasting like green beans with a slight okra-like mucilage. They're highly nutritious and productive in desert conditions. The mature pods produce strong black fiber used in traditional basket weaving. The Tohono O'odham cultivated specific varieties of Devil's Claw with longer, darker fibers perfect for basket designs. These domesticated varieties are distinct from wild devil's claw. When traditional basketry declined due to economic pressures and cultural disruption, cultivation of devil's claw declined as well. Today, it's rarely grown outside of indigenous communities working to preserve traditional crafts. How do you grow devil's claw? Plant seeds in spring in full sun and sandy, well-drained soil. Devil's claw is drought-tolerant and requires minimal water once established. The plants sprawl across the ground with large leaves and attractive flowers. Harvest young pods when tender, about 2 to 3 inches long, for eating. Cook like green beans. For fiber, let pods mature completely and dry on the plant, then split them to extract the black fibers. Devil's claw represents the intersection of food and culture. It's not just sustenance, it's art, tradition, and identity woven together. Vegetable number 11, pumpkin, native varieties. Number 11 is native pumpkin varieties, distinct from the commercial pumpkins most people know. Indigenous peoples across North America developed hundreds of pumpkin varieties adapted to specific regions and uses. Here's why these native pumpkin varieties need to return. They're adapted to local climates, thriving with minimal irrigation. They have superior nutrition compared to commercial varieties, with higher levels of beta-carotene and vitamins. And they often have better flavor, denser flesh, and longer storage life. Varieties like Seminole pumpkin, Cherokee tan pumpkin, and Oaxacan green pumpkin were developed over centuries for specific purposes. Some were bred for long storage, others for seed production, others for fresh eating. When commercial agriculture standardized pumpkins for the jack-o'-lantern market and canned pumpkin industry, these diverse regional varieties were abandoned. Today, most people have only tasted 1 or 2 pumpkin varieties, not realizing the diversity that once existed. How do you grow native pumpkin varieties? Plant in late spring in full sun. Space 4 to 6 feet apart. Water regularly until established. Many native varieties are more drought tolerant than commercial pumpkins once rooted. Harvest when skins harden and stems dry. Cure for 2 weeks before storing. Many native varieties store for 6 to 12 months in cool, dry conditions. Source seeds from indigenous seed suppliers like Native Seeds/Search, or from heirloom companies that credit indigenous origins. Vegetable number 12, Camas bulbs. At number 12, we have Camas bulbs, and this is one of the most historically important indigenous foods in the Pacific Northwest. Camas bulbs were cultivated and managed by numerous tribes, including Nez Perce, Salish, and Chinook peoples, for at least 8,000 years. Here's why Camas bulbs need to return. They're incredibly nutritious, high in inulin and complex carbohydrates. They were a staple food, stored for winter and traded extensively. And they represent sophisticated indigenous land management, including controlled burning to maintain Camas meadows. Native peoples didn't just harvest wild camas. They actively managed the landscape, removing weeds, transplanting bulbs to new areas, and using fire to maintain open meadows. This was agriculture, just not the European model of plowing and planting. When European settlers arrived, Camas meadows were converted to farmland or lost to development. Traditional management practices were stopped. Camas went from a staple food to a near-forgotten plant. Today, indigenous communities are working to restore Camas meadows and revive traditional harvesting practices. How do you grow camas? Plant bulbs in fall in full sun or partial shade. Camas prefers moist, well-drained soil. The plants produce beautiful blue flowers in spring, then die back in summer. Bulbs are harvested in late summer after foliage dies. Camas bulbs must be slow-cooked for 24 to 48 hours to convert the inulin to digestible sugars. Traditionally, they were pit-roasted. The cooked bulbs taste sweet, like molasses or baked pear. Warning: camas look similar to death camas, which is poisonous. Only harvest camas if you are 100% certain of identification. Camas represents indigenous land stewardship. It shows that agriculture isn't just plowing and planting, it's working with natural ecosystems to increase food production. Vegetable number 13, nodding onion. Number 13 is nodding onion, a native wild onion that was cultivated and managed by indigenous peoples across North America. The bulbs, leaves, and flowers are all edible. Here's why nodding onion needs to return. It's perennial, coming back year after year without replanting. It's cold hardy, surviving harsh winters. And it's productive, with bulbs that multiply and can be divided. Native peoples managed wild onion populations. transplanting bulbs to convenient locations near camps and villages. They harvested bulbs, leaves, and flowers, using all parts of the plant. When European onions arrived with colonizers, native onion species were abandoned in favor of larger bulbed varieties. Today, most people don't even recognize nodding onion as food. How do you grow nodding onion? Plant bulbs in fall or divide existing clumps in spring. Nodding onion prefers full sun and well-drained soil. The plants produce attractive pink or white flowers that nod downward, hence the name. Harvest leaves like chives throughout the growing season. Dig bulbs in fall when foliage dies back. The bulbs are small but flavorful, with a mild onion taste perfect for fresh use or pickling. Nodding onion is perfect for permaculture food forests, providing perennial onion flavor with zero maintenance. Vegetable number 14, yellow-flowered gourd. At number 14, we have yellow-flowered gourd, also called buffalo gourd or coyote gourd. This sprawling vine was cultivated by indigenous peoples across the Southwest and Great Plains for its seeds and roots. Here's why yellow-flowered gourd needs to return. The seeds are incredibly nutritious, with 30% protein and 40% oil. They taste like a cross between pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds. The roots are edible when properly prepared and were used as soap. Native peoples planted yellow-flowered gourd near water sources, letting the vines sprawl across the desert. The seeds were harvested, roasted, and eaten or ground into meal. When commercial agriculture arrived, yellow-flowered gourd was dismissed as worthless because the flesh isn't palatable. But indigenous peoples never ate the flesh. They cultivated it specifically for the nutritious seeds. How do you grow yellow-flowered gourd? Plant seeds in spring in full sun. The vines are incredibly drought-tolerant and sprawl widely. The plants produce yellow flowers followed by small, hard gourds. Harvest gourds in fall when fully mature. Extract seeds and roast them. The flavor is rich and nutty, delicious as a snack or ground into flour. Yellow-flowered gourd represents specialized knowledge. The fruit looks inedible, but the seeds are treasure. Indigenous peoples understood this distinction. Modern agriculture doesn't. Vegetable number 15, sweet Sicily, Osmorrhiza. Number 15 is sweet Sicily, specifically the native North American species Osmorrhiza. The roots taste like sweet licorice and were used by many indigenous nations as food and medicine. Here's why sweet Sicily needs to return. The roots are nutritious and flavorful, with a unique sweet, anise-like taste. They're perennial and shade-tolerant, growing in forest conditions where most vegetables fail, and they have medicinal properties, traditionally used for digestive issues and sore throats. Native peoples harvested sweet Sicily roots in spring and fall, eating them fresh or drying them for storage. The leaves and seeds were also used for flavoring. When European colonization brought new foods and changed indigenous lifestyles, wild foods like sweet Sicily were gradually abandoned. How do you grow sweet Sicily? Plant seeds or root divisions in partial to full shade. Sweet Sicily prefers moist, rich soil and woodland conditions. The plants grow 2 to 3 feet tall with delicate fern-like leaves. Harvest roots in fall when they're plump and sweet. The flavor intensifies with cold weather. Eat fresh, sliced thin in salads, or cooked like parsnips. Sweet Sicily represents niche adaptation. It fills the shady, moist forest understory where conventional vegetables won't grow. That's valuable space in a diverse food system. Vegetable number 16, wolfberry, native goji. And finally, at number 16, we have native wolfberry species, relatives of the goji berry that were cultivated by indigenous peoples in the Southwest. The berries are edible, nutritious, and drought-tolerant. Here's why native wolfberry needs to return. The berries are high in vitamins A and C, antioxidants, and amino acids. The plants are extremely drought-tolerant, thriving in desert conditions, and they're perennial shrubs that produce for decades. Native peoples harvested wolfberries fresh and dried them for winter storage. They were an important vitamin source in regions where fresh fruit was scarce. When commercial agriculture introduced European fruits, native wolfberries were abandoned. Today, ironically, Asian goji berries, a close relative, are marketed as superfoods, while native wolfberries are forgotten. How do you grow native wolfberry? Plant shrubs in full sun in well-drained soil. Water until established, then reduce watering. Native wolfberry is drought-tolerant once rooted. Harvest berries when fully ripe and red. They can be eaten fresh, though the flavor is tart. More commonly, they're dried and added to trail mix, teas, or rehydrated for cooking. Native wolfberry represents indigenous superfoods. We don't need to import exotic berries from across the world. We had our own, right here, perfectly adapted to North American climates. Alright, I promised you a bonus tip, and this one's essential. Here it is: how to source authentic indigenous seeds and support indigenous seed sovereignty. First, buy from indigenous-run seed companies and organizations. Native Seeds/Search in Arizona preserves and distributes seeds from indigenous communities in the Southwest. Dream of Wild Health in Minnesota focuses on Dakota and Ojibwe seeds. The Indigenous Seed Keepers Network connects indigenous seed keepers across North America. Second, respect cultural protocols. Some seeds are sacred and not meant to be shared outside of specific communities. Always honor restrictions. If a seed source says a variety is not for sale or distribution, respect that. Food sovereignty includes the right to control traditional seeds. Third, learn the stories. These crops aren't just plants. They carry history, culture, and knowledge. When you grow them, learn where they came from, how indigenous peoples use them, and the cultural context. Share that knowledge respectfully. Fourth, save and share seeds, but only if it's appropriate. Open-pollinated varieties can be saved and shared, but don't commercialize indigenous varieties or claim them as your own. Share freely within seed-saving communities, giving credit to indigenous origins. Fifth, support indigenous food sovereignty movements. Organizations like the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, Slow Food Indigenous Terra Madre, and Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance are doing critical work. Donate, volunteer, and amplify their voices. Remember, these seeds survived genocide, forced relocation, cultural suppression, and centuries of neglect. They survived because indigenous peoples refused to let them disappear. Growing them today is an act of solidarity, but it must be done respectfully, with humility, and with recognition of whose knowledge created these crops. So there you have it. 16 forgotten vegetables Native Americans grew that desperately need to return. Tepary beans, wild rice, Jerusalem artichoke, groundnut, Hopi pale gray squash, Chenopodium, Amaranth, Three Sisters beans, Kushaw squash, devil's claw, native pumpkins, Camas bulbs, nodding onion, yellow-flowered gourd, sweet Sicily, and native wolfberry. Every single one of these crops represents thousands of years of indigenous agricultural knowledge. They're not just food, they're adaptation, resilience, and cultural survival embodied in seeds. We lost 90% of indigenous crop diversity through colonization, but these crops survived, and we can help them return by growing them, saving seeds, and sharing knowledge. When you grow these crops, you're not just gardening, you're participating in decolonizing the food system. You're honoring indigenous knowledge, you're building climate resilience, and you're ensuring these crops never come close to extinction again. If this video inspired you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. This channel is about food sovereignty and preserving agricultural heritage. And drop a comment below telling me which indigenous crop you're most excited to grow. Remember, food is culture. Seeds carry knowledge, and every garden that grows indigenous crops is an act of resistance against the forces that tried to erase them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Now get out there and grow indigenous. Respectfully.